Yeah, now we can start. So, good evening to everybody. It is really my pleasure and my honor to welcome Dr. Sabine Little from School of Education, University of Sheffield. I hope I've got the information correct. She is Deputy Director of Learning and Teaching, also a lecturer in Educational Studies, Languages Education, and a Senior Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, and the Director of the MA Program Education, Teaching and Learning, and the Director of International Postgraduate Certificate in Education. So lots and lots of hats that she has to wear. Maybe a few things what I have found about your research studies, but or research interests, but you can then, of course, add more information about that. So she has a number of research interests, which are, as she says, multifaceted and overlapping. Her main and overarching research interest is in the field of heritage, language learners, and identity. So she's interested how families who speak multiple languages in the home navigate these languages and what this means for individual family members' sense of identity and well-being. And she has been involved in many different projects. So Erasmus, the UK Literacy Association, and one of the, is this Erasmus bid from summer 2016 still going on?
It's finished now.
Ah, it's finished, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that one focused on helping children from immigrant and refugee families by giving teachers a platform to exchange ideas and develop their skills of teaching reading in multicultural, plurilingual, and diverse classrooms. So if any, let's say, materials or outcomes are available on the board, on the website, we would be interested. Sure. If you can maybe share this with us. And yeah, what I really appreciate, and this is exactly what you're doing now, is that you lead public engagement events and that you somehow love sharing your research with the wider public. Yeah, and this is, I think, what scientists don't do enough. We all don't do enough, yeah. So the screen is yours, and so please, thank you very much for being with us. And so the word is yours, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carmen, for this lovely introduction. And thank you for inviting me. We were saying just before everybody arrived that this is one of the, dare I say, positive things coming out of the pandemic, that it has opened many more doors for international convergence, people coming together and sharing research and talking to each other. And so I am very, very glad to be here tonight. I have to admit, I was in Ljubljana in summer 2019. So I am visualizing walking along the Ljubljanica, you know, it was, well, I told my husband, my son and I came to visit, and I've told my husband that we have to return because he has to visit Slovenia as well. So thank you for inviting me. I am going to be spending the next 45 minutes or so to an hour, we'll see how we get along, sharing parts of my work on multilingual classrooms as social justice and presenting the Lost Worlds project. And the reason it is called Lost Worlds is that there was a few years ago an uproar because certain words were being deleted from the children's dictionary. And they were all nature-related words. So words like acorn and badger and ivy were taken out of the children's dictionary because they were deemed to be no longer relevant and made space for other words. And there was a big uproar about how the natural world is important. And a book came out by a very famous writer, Rob McFarlane, and an illustrator, Jackie Morris. And they collaborated together to give these lost words, these words that were being dropped from the dictionary, a new life. And actually, there were big drives to make sure that every primary school in the country had access to this book, which essentially worked to reintroduce nature. So when it came to finding a name for for my project, I contacted Rob McFarlane and Jackie Morris, and I said, I would like to build on the work that you have done, but actually argue that when multilingual children lose their home languages and part of their words, they are losing part of their world. They are losing a part of their identity. So, and they were very supportive of the project, which is why all the activities that I'll be talking about today actually do have an explicit link to nature and sustainability. So that is the nod to the original Lost Words book, and taking it a step further and saying, actually, when multilingual children lose part of their language, they lose part of their identity, they lose part of their world, part of who they are. And that, in my view, makes looking after and caring for these children as an issue of social justice. It is not just a skill development, it's not just nice to be multilingual, it is actually an element of social justice. So I will be sharing a bit of background from theory and research, both mine and that of other people. And I'm offering some insights from children, families, and teachers that have come out of my own research before I'm moving on to the Lost Worlds project, sharing some of the actual activities. I've tried to keep it fairly light, being very much aware that we're very, very close to the holidays, and everybody who came out tonight probably had, you know, the choice of being here or drinking a glass of mulled wine somewhere. So I'm very grateful that you are making the time. And I also hope that there will be plenty of time for discussion at the end. While I'm sharing, I can't actually see the chat myself, but if there's any questions that you want to add while I'm talking, then when I'm done presenting, we can have a look, and I'll come to them then. So if I don't answer questions as they turn up in the chat while I'm presenting, I apologize, I can't see them at the moment. That's just a feature of Zoom. So a quote that I really like about literacy. I do a lot of work on literacy and with the UK Literacy Association, and I'm putting that in little quotation marks because Kiramba talks about literacy not being a neutral term, that when we talk about literacy, we automatically ignore literacies, children's multiple literacies, and the cultural needs and goals that come along with this. So in my work, I spend a lot of time convincing teachers that it's not either or. It's not either English literacy or home literacy. It is literacies, which includes everything and anything that the child might have access to. And the reason I like this quote is because it gives me a good springboard to say that actually, I don't know about the national curriculum in Slovenia, but here, when the curriculum talks about language skills and language development, it doesn't explicitly say so, but it means the English language skills and the English language development. So again, it means the language of instruction, the language of the curriculum, the language of the classroom. And I'll be saying a little bit more about, again, coming back to social justice, what that does to children, this conscious and subconscious centering of one language over all others. And so therefore, in the same way as when we talk about literacy, we are ignoring literacies in the classroom. When we talk about language, we ignore languages. And I think we ignore that to our detriment, to our disadvantage, and to the children's disadvantage as well. And again, later on, I know I'm mainly preaching to the converted here, but I'm hoping that I'll have some examples from my practice that people will be finding helpful. So some of the examples that I'm presenting are specifically from the England context, because that is obviously where I'm working. And I do think it is also a particularly difficult context to be working in, because English is so all-consuming in the world. So schools in England struggle with this idea that other languages matter, especially home languages. Foreign languages like German, French, Spanish, and newly, to some extent, Mandarin, Chinese, for example, they matter. So my son, who's growing up bilingual, I'm German, I maybe should have said, my son, who is 14 years old, who's growing up bilingual English-German, has a very different experience on a day-to-day basis, saying that he's half German, than a school friend of his who is half Czech, because people had a sort of frame of reference when he says he's German. They can string together a word or two, they might be able to order a beer. So there are hierarchies of languages as well, obviously, and especially within the England context. But in 1975, which goes back 46 years now, there was an important document in the UK from the Department of Education and Skills, as it was called at the time. And it was called A Language for Life. And it was the biggest report so far and still that the government ever commissioned on this idea of multilingualism. So the fact that this document is 46 years old should tell us something about how important the government thinks this is. There was a slightly different report in 2020, but not as big as this one. And a quote that is most often quoted from this report is this one. And I like it so much that I will read it, even though I don't normally believe in reading slides. But no child should be expected to cast off the language and culture of the home as he, it was the 1970s, crosses the school threshold, nor to live and act as though school and home represent two totally separate and different cultures which have to be firmly kept apart. Now, in my work, this is really, really important, and I'll be coming to what the children and the families are telling me today in the 2010s, in the 2020s, about their experiences. And I will be returning to the Bullock report a couple of times throughout the talk, because somewhere England went terribly wrong in trying to make this vision happen, because 46 years on, we are really not there at all. When we talk about this idea of not casting off language and culture, and the school acknowledging children's home cultures and languages, a term that I use a lot now is funds of knowledge, the funds of knowledge approach. So the idea that, I like the term funds because, similar to Bourdieu's idea of cultural capital, it shows that there is value to it. We have a value, that their cultural values and customs are worth something. However, as I mentioned earlier, they may not necessarily correspond to the formal education context. So children's home literacy experiences, for example, might not necessarily involve reading, but be more focused on oracy and oral storytelling, and as such might not be valued in formal education context. And similarly, again, we're at the point where not all languages are valued equally in formal education contexts. One of the reasons why I like funds of knowledge as an approach is because of the research on dark funds of knowledge, which is around the idea, when I talk to schools about what do you do, children's home languages and cultures are always celebrated. They are always, later on I will be talking about Diversity Week, and those sorts of moves where multilingualism is wheeled out, pushed out once a year, or maybe for a month or something, for International Mother Tongue Day or something. But Zippin talks about dark funds of knowledge, that actually children's home experiences are not all positive. They are not all cause for celebration. And therefore, maybe a more helpful approach is the normalization of multilingualism, which is what I'm trying to argue for in my work, rather than celebratory, rather than something that you focus a lot of attention on. Instead, we want to arrive at the point, I believe, where multilingualism and multiculturalism in schools is normalized to the point that if children, if 3 children have a chat across 4 languages, nobody blinks, nobody bats an eyelid, nobody thinks that this is anything worth writing home about, which is really difficult because at the moment so few schools do it that every time they do it, I'm waving a big flag and say, look, let's celebrate them doing it. But I do believe that maybe the celebration has to come before the normalization can happen. Maybe we need to highlight the good practice in order to be able to normalize it. So it's a tricky fight, and I'm grateful to Catherine Hu, who has talked about multilingualism and what that means becoming a pressing educational matter of concern of our time. So I will briefly say a little bit about where we are in England right now to give a bit more of a sort of policy context, because it will give you an idea of how the project and the activities within it are situated when I talk about that later on. So right now in England, approximately 1 in 5 students are 1st or 2nd generation immigrants and are registered as having English as an additional language. There is something important about this registered as English as an additional language, because about 4 or 5 years ago, schools were receiving money. The way schools were funded changed, and rather than money going to local authorities, they were then distributed to schools directly based on how many pupils were registered as having English as an additional language. It was at that point, and at that point only, that we received a letter from school saying, doesn't your son speak German? Can we register him as having English as an additional language? And the reason I'm mentioning this is because multilingualism in the UK is typically, I do say typically, and maybe I should say England rather than the UK, because the other nations, Wales, etc., they do better. But there are several reasons why a child's multilingualism might get flagged, highlighted. If their English is not good enough to participate in the curriculum, their multilingualism is an issue, it's a problem, it's a deficit. If their English is good enough, they tend to become invisible. So their multilingualism, from that point on, if it's not an issue, it's invisible. Apart from moments like what happened to my son, funding became attached to it, in which case it was briefly highlighted. We filled in a form saying, yes, he does speak German at home. The school got some extra money, even though my son's English is native speaker level. So again, it wasn't about normalization. It wasn't even about celebration. It was a very pragmatic, practical approach to securing money for the school. There are a lot of curriculum pressures on teachers, and I have only one slide on some quotes from teachers from a study that we did. So there is a lot of pressure on focusing on English because it's the language that is tested, of course, and therefore immediately is foregrounded. And when I talk to parents, it becomes apparent that the school start, and I'm not alone in that research, the school start often marks the point in time where the home language loses at least some focus. And for children, because only one of the languages that they speak is now being formally recognized and formally valued and formally tested, many children that I work with choose the school start to begin questioning the hierarchy of the different languages they speak and the purposes of that. Against all this backdrop, we've recently had, when I say recently, I sort of mean over the past 15 years or so, opportunities for formal qualifications in heritage languages being cut. So in England, we have GCSEs and A-levels. So GCSEs are taken at age 16, A-levels at age 18, and the opportunity to take GCSEs in many heritage languages disappeared in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And all of this means that heritage language education mainly takes place in community schools, Saturday schools, after schools, with often volunteer teachers rather than qualified teachers. And even though there is a lot of amazing work at varying levels, there are a number of organizations such as NALBIC and the Bell Foundation, multilingualism, plurilingualism is not recognized as part of the formal national policy. However, as we unite, as we come together under this umbrella of multilingualism as a social justice issue, we are slowly beginning to make headway, not necessarily at national policy level, but more with schools. Because actually, no school likes to hear that they are not doing their bit for social justice. Sorry, that was my cat. In case you just heard a loud noise, my cat just knocked something over. So yeah, so what happens when you talk to children and families about their multiple languages? And here are just some links in case you're sharing the slides later, or you watch this. What I'll be talking about is taken from, these are actually 4 articles about 3 different studies that I'll be talking about. So I'm not necessarily going to say which data comes from which study, because they all interlink really. So when I talk to children about their language, or to families and children about their language and literacy experiences, these are the sorts of things that they're telling me. This is from 2 different studies and 3 different families, and representative of many other quotes I've had from families. So one was a boy in year 6, that's the highest level primary school, so he's about to go to secondary school. He's been at the same school for 6 years, and nobody at his school, not his friends, not his teachers, know that he speaks Hungarian. The second quote, I was doing a study on reading, multilingual reading, and I went into a school and I tried to interview, I'd asked the teacher to identify for me the pupils the teacher knew were reading in their home languages, because I wanted to have a chat with them. And I spent 20 minutes with this group of 6 children, I believe, and every single book they were listing was in English. And I was trying, as researchers do, not to ask any leading questions. So so tell me about what you read. Okay, what do you like reading? Okay. And after 20 minutes of this, in my desperation, I said, well, but I heard you read in other languages as well. Is that true? And it was at that precise moment that this quote happened from a 9-year-old. I read all the Harry Potter books in Bengali, but why do you want to know about that? Nobody wants to know about that. So obviously the Harry Potter books, they're quite, they're quite substantial, especially if you read all 7, especially if you are, 9 years old and you read them in Bengali. So what had happened, what we'd identified was, I was an adult in a school context. I visited them at school. We were on school premises, and I was asking them about reading. And every single child had edited out their home language, their heritage language identity, because they assumed that due to the context we were speaking in, I would only be interested in the English part of themselves. And once we'd had this quote, they were telling me all sorts of things that they were reading. And again, I'll come back to this idea that actually breaking down this conditioning takes time. So introducing multilingualism in the classroom doesn't mean that it will be immediately successful, because this idea of editing your identity is very ingrained in children as well as in parents, as the last quote shows, where a mother was saying, so in England, I don't know whether it's the same in Slovenia, we have home reading diaries. So parents are expected to read with their children and to write in the reading diary what they read together or what the child read at home. And when my son was in year 2, I believe, it was sheer fluke, it was accident. I wrote a German book into the home reading diary, and I received a note from the teacher to please not do that, to please only write English language books into the home reading diary. And you can imagine that the teacher picked the wrong person to send that note to. So I sent 2 sides of A4, a very nice letter, explaining the research and explaining that it was important for my son to see that his home language was being valued. And I said to the teacher, you don't have to do anything. You just have to tick it off, because the teacher doesn't do anything with the English reading. They just write well done and put a tick or a stamp next to it or something like that. I said, I don't expect you to do anything else. I just expect you to treat both his languages the same. And ever since that experience, I have asked every single family I've ever worked with this reading diary question. And that in and of itself would make a fascinating study. So this is just one example of a parent who said it would never occur to her to write reading in the home language. I have to say that over the last 2, 3, 4 years, this has changed a bit. I'm beginning to see a change. I'm beginning to see both from teachers, more examples of course, we make it clear to parents. And I see more from parents to say, yes, we write that in. So change is happening. It's glacially slow, but it is happening. So I mentioned that we were doing a study with teachers. We interviewed 40 teachers. They were all primary school teachers, so teaching age 5 to 11-year-olds. And I'm not going to go into great detail, but just to sort of show some of the things that they have told us. So at the top there, we've got posters that say bienvenido, hola, but nothing to do with the languages that we have in school. So it's sort of generic nod to other languages exist in the world. We have the time pressures on the left here going anti-clockwise. There's not enough hours in the day to try and tackle the home language as well. And I like this language use, because just the idea that you have to tackle it makes it sound like a problem rather than an opportunity. Again, time pressures, EAL, so English as an additional language interventions that I'm giving time for is half an hour per person at maybe twice a week. So again, when we talk to teachers about multilingual opportunities, some of them interpreted that automatically as, how are you addressing the shortcomings in English? So this teacher misunderstood the question, and rather than talking about opportunities for multilingualism, was talking about how to address the deficit of English in the multilingual children. And then there, we put a lot of effort into making sure everyone feels welcome and celebrated. So we've had one of the parents who's Chinese, she comes in as part of Diversity Week. So this is exactly what I was talking about, that in many schools, for a week or a month of the year, there are activities where multilingualism is celebrated, and then it goes on the back burner, on the back shelf, until the celebratory week the next year, which is why I try so hard to work on the normalizing. So taking all these things together sort of showed me that if I was trying to address this, I would have to make it easy to integrate into the classroom without teachers having to be experts in the various languages. Because we don't, I'm assuming it's the same in Slovenia, that our multilingual classrooms, they're very heterogeneous. You know, we can have up to 15, 20 languages in one classroom. So one of the things that the teachers tell me is, well, I don't speak all those languages. How could I possibly support them? So in trying to create resources, it was about making sure that this was done in such a way that teachers did not have to become language experts overnight. So again, when I talk to schools and I have to give them reasons why should they support home or heritage languages in the classroom, I talk about a lot about the things that I've talked about, that children shouldn't have to edit part of their identity, that schools' multiculturalism should go beyond a multilingual welcome sign on the door, and that actually language awareness and language development does mean all their languages, and that actually if they have the opportunity to build on this language awareness and use one to puzzle out the other, that ultimately assists their entire learning process. It's not about supporting the home language, it's about giving children the tools to use all their languages for learning, no matter what it is they're learning. And I've mentioned of British values, which sounds horrible, but is something that the government is pushing. And part of the British values is openness to other cultures, etc. So sometimes I drag that out because it means that they can actually link it to what the government wants them to do. So sometimes this helps a teacher who has to convince a headmaster or headmistress or director. So when I give examples, I'm learning Mandarin Chinese, poorly, I should say. But it's a great language for me to use by illustration, because actually from a language grammar perspective, it's really straightforward. So when I talk to teachers and I say, okay, you know, you've got 今天天气很好, which translates to today weather very good. Well, we've got 4 words, but 6 characters. So hang on. So some words have got more than 1 character, and you've got the same character twice. And actually that character is sky. So you've actually got the present sky, that's today. So present sky together is today. And sky plus air is the weather. So all of a sudden, children have to work out that this same character twice has a completely different meaning. And there is no verb in this sentence because Mandarin doesn't require a verb. There are no spaces between the words. So you only know that a sentence is ended by the full stop, and in between you've just kind of got to make a best guess of where the words might start or finish. You have no definite or indefinite article. There's no the or in Mandarin, and time tends to come first. I often then give the example that in German, if you use weil, because the verb moves to the end of the sentence, or normally in the German sentence, you'll find the verb, the second idea in the sentence. So once pupils get this idea, or students get this idea, and teachers to some extent get this idea that if you understand how different languages work, you can actually unpick common mistakes that you are making. It's much easier to say, oh, I keep forgetting the verb because my language doesn't always require one. Or I keep, for much more common, I keep forgetting the definite and indefinite articles because my language does not have them. That is much, much more helpful than you missed the. You missed the again. Here is another the missing. So even if teachers don't know this, giving children the tools to unpick their own language and to unpick the language of instruction gives them an opportunity to become experts of their own learning process. And actually that helps all children, not just the multilingual ones. So for all children, it will be helpful to develop increased language awareness. And ultimately facilitates discussions. I've seen great work happening when I work in a classroom of kids suddenly starting to talk to each other and saying, oh, you say that in Czech, that sounds very similar to what I'm saying in, you know, Russian or Slovak or what, you know, and they start identifying common roots and systems all by themselves. I go in and I read the Town Musicians of Bremen, die Bremer Stadtmusikanten, which is a story about a donkey, a dog, a cat, and a cockerel. And in telling it, I read the story and, oh, how many languages can we say dog in? And it's very non-threatening because it doesn't require children to know a whole sentence, just a single word. And they say, oh, what sound does a dog, how does a sort of dog go in your language? And by the time we get to the cockerel, which is hilarious, if you ever want to have fun, ask a classroom of 20 different language kids what sound a cockerel makes. And maybe by the end we can work out what sound a cockerel makes in Slovene. So, I mean, just the difference between cock-a-doodle-doo and kikeriki is...
Yes,
you know.
kikeriki.
Is it kikeriki? Okay,
yes,
so
kikeriki.
it's the same as a...
Kikeriki, yes.
So, and I think I like this because it makes language non-threatening as well. Things like this include language fun. Okay, so I've talked a lot. This was a long lead in, but I will talk about the Lost Worlds project, and I have got some examples as well. Within the Lost Worlds project, all the activities are linked to the English national curriculum. That's what the NC stands for. And as I mentioned earlier, to nature conservation sustainability. The link at the bottom is there, and all lesson plans and resources are just freely available to download. I would love it if anybody uses them, adapts them. They are, please do whatever you want with them. If you could let me know, that would be fantastic, because then in turn I can tell the funders that they're being used, which I'm sure they would be happy about. And it's actually, we worked with Schools of Sanctuary, which is an organization that helps schools raise awareness and gain a badge, an award for making schools a welcoming environment for children from forced migration, refugee backgrounds. So we've worked with Schools of Sanctuary and talked to them and said, well, actually, sustaining multilingualism and supporting multilingualism does show that the school is welcoming to children from all kinds of backgrounds. So we've got a little bit of a tick there by saying to schools, if you use our materials, you are halfway on your way to gain this award of being a School of Sanctuary. So in terms of getting credibility for the project, that was really useful for us as well. I've got a few slides to share. All of them are essentially encouraging children to bring all their languages to their work in a repertoire approach. It doesn't necessarily require them to be able to write everything or be equally good in both languages. This one example on the left is mostly the ideas are straightforward, and it's about the concept of the idea rather than the idea itself. So here it was label a mini beast. So like an insect or something, which in England is on the primary school curriculum. Everybody has to do it. And all we did was create a little worksheet and a little presentation. So, okay, just tell the children that when they are labeling their mini beast, to do it in all the languages that they speak. It's as easy as that. And if they don't know a word, give them the tools to look it up. Tell them to ask their parents, and you can identify gaps in any language. Now, in whether that's in English or that's in the home language. Here we have an example of a boy who speaks Cantonese and Macedonian at home. So he's got Cantonese, Macedonian, English. And then he was having so much fun that he looked them all up in French to impress his school French teacher. So this is just one example that when you start bringing out children's, valuing and normalizing children's languages, they're not necessarily all correct, I should say. I can see Carmen going, what does that say?
That's really interesting, because many of us, in ex-Yugoslavia learned the Cyrillic, and I just figured it out, what it says. I think here is noge or nože, something like that, and up here head is glava. Yeah, so yeah, interesting, very interesting. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, there's a bit missing at the bottom. The one that points to the spot is actually wrong in French, but that's fine. Kids make mistakes in all languages all the time. So, and even then it opens up opportunities for discussion. And it, again, parental engagement. So if you ask children to do it and to, there's gaps. And once you've labeled a mini beast, it doesn't matter whether you label a mini beast or the water cycle or a low pressure front in geography in secondary school. Throughout school, you have to draw and label and name things all the time. So there are many, many opportunities to bring in languages through all age ranges and have that skill grow with the children. Starting off fairly straightforward with head, eye, leg, etc., and ultimately ending up with, I don't know, condensation or whatever. We have one which we've got one activity which I love, which is about asking children to look at the rhythm of language. And the whole outcome is for them to make a rap or a speech song about mini beasts. And it's nothing particularly highbrow or important. So if you imagine you sit there and, I don't know, in English, I might go, caterpillar, 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 slug, caterpillar, caterpillar, butterfly, butterfly, caterpillar. So it's about understanding the rhythm of syllables and then saying, okay, how do you say that in your language? Is that the same rhythm or a different rhythm? And can they bring all the different languages together? And this is just one of the presentation slides that comes with the activity. And it has got, I've not got it live for this session, but it's got a sound file there, and they can listen to it and match it to the right-hand side and explore, how many syllables does it have? How is it, how long is a syllable? Where is the stress on the syllable? And that gives them, again, an opportunity for language awareness. And we're just editing a video where children did that. They did it with the word for owl for some reason. They decided to do it. And we went into the school and filmed them doing that. And they had so much fun with it because, again, it's playful language use. And if one child can say it in a language, they all learned the word. So again, it's openness to other languages and cultures. We have an activity about calligrams. So a calligram, for those, I don't know how it translates, but it's a shape poem. So you write words in the shape of the thing that you are trying to create. And we've created a number of shapes. And later on, I've got an example of children who just did their own thing. And in this instance, we provide some examples at the bottom, again, just so children encounter different scripts, different languages. And when we hear from schools, what we tend to find is that multilingual children tend to use their own languages, and children who only speak English tend to get really excited about all the different languages, and they just copy it across. But even though they only copy it across, they have encountered different languages. I've got 4 slides in very quick succession. Guess the mini beast. So this presents, there are more mini beasts on the actual presentation. I've just done 2, but for example, you present the children this slide and you say, okay, so It's a Nacktschnecke in German, and that translates to naked snail. And similarly, the Polish translates to naked snail. And you might have somebody in the classroom who can read it. In simplified Chinese, the name translates to snot insect. And then you ask the children, what could it be? Use all the knowledge. If you had a naked snail, if a snail loses its house, what kind of animal is it? And you get the children to guess. And then you've got the resolution slide. And you say, oh, you know, it's a slug. So slug is a word which in English doesn't really offer you a lot to go with. It's not a very playful or informative word. And then similarly, in Thai, this creature is called a butterfly worm. And in Vietnamese, it's called a deep butterfly. And in Igbo, it's called a caterpillar. So what could it be? And again, here you can look and you can say, oh, actually, it's, you know, well, we say caterpillar, we spell it completely differently, but the pronunciation is very similar to the Igbo. And then again, the children will guess that it's a caterpillar. And I ask schools to use this just as a starter activity, you know, when you are working on mini beasts, for example. And it's fun because children might say, oh, English doesn't do that. English doesn't have those kinds of words, but you only have to look at the word butterfly when you start thinking about it. Oh, actually, that, you know, that is a compound noun. You have got two different words together there. It's not necessarily a fly that flies in butter, but English, you know, a hedgehog, for example. And of course, German being the queen language of compound nouns. So again, it introduces the idea of language playfulness, but also links to science. You know, the idea of a butterfly worm could help a child remember the life cycle of a butterfly. So we did in June an activity called 30 Days Wild. And actually 30 Days Wild wasn't our idea. It's something that is run by a big environmental charity every year. So we just hopped on and we said, okay, we're going to make it this 30 Days Wild multilingual. And for every day during June, we posted an idea every day for something really quick that would enable schools to integrate multilingualism in the classroom. And we had lots of schools jump on board. So there's 3 examples here. Go outside, find 3 creatures that can fly. Can you name them in another language? And we at schools tweet us back and say, yes, we found, you know, a fliege, or, you know, whatever. And then on the right there was a question specifically about butterflies, and these children did their own calligrams. So they collected the word butterfly in all the classroom languages. And on the right hand side, this is a secondary school pupil. So one of the activities was to write an acrostic poem, which is where every line starts with a letter, and if you read it down, they spell a word. So here it's spelled wild, going down, so just 4 lines. And this was one student, a secondary school student, who spoke Tagalog, writing an acrostic poem in his own language, and the translation is just provided there. So there were different activities useful for different languages, and we had slightly different schools participating each day, but every day we had at least a few schools who sort of went, right, you know, we can take part in this one. And we did the same again for COP26 in Glasgow. One example that we did for International Refugee Day was an activity called 100 Feathers. And there is a film, you can just see the television screen there. So if you go on the website and find the 100 Feathers activity, you can find a film that we created for it. And the concept is really simple. There's 100 feathers, they fly through the world and they land somewhere and they get found. And the children are asked to write a story about how this feather gets found. Who finds it? Where do they live? What do they do with it? So the feathers have been on a journey. So the idea is of migration, and it might be found by somebody who is on a journey themselves or not. And the idea was then that they would integrate their home languages. And you can see here one school, as a first instance, had the children create feathers and just write individual words of how somebody who travels, who is a refugee, might feel. And you can see there's positive and negative words there. And on the left-hand side, you've got some of them in Arabic. And then they used those to build on and write some stories. And it was a great activity because it offered a lot of flexibility to pupils, even if they only knew a few words or could only write a few languages in their home, a few words in their home language. So we had stories that were largely in English, but in between you might have, where do you come from? She said, and the where do you come from would have been in the home language. So it was an opportunity to integrate just little bits. Again, just normalizing, just playing with the idea of, oh, I can write a story that uses my full linguistic repertoire in a meaningful way. So that was very exciting for us. And the last activity that I want to briefly talk about is a slightly longer one, and there is a publication linked to it, the idea of a rivers of reading. And it looks at children's literacy reading experiences across all their languages through a critical incident analysis. So rather than saying what were your favorite books, it's what out of all the things that you read, which ones were most important and why were they important? And it's a study that I did on multilingual children, or with multilingual children. And what I found was that monolingual children very much tend to say, this was my favorite book. They have a very limited reason or range of reasons to include reading material, whereas multilingual children have got much, much more complex reasons, whether it's the first that they managed to read by themselves or a book that actually accompanied them on a journey of migration. So if they moved from one country to another and they had to choose what to take and what to leave behind, the books that they took had special meaning. They were important. They were important enough to include. So there are links there between language and migration and identity that I found really important. And there is the link to the whole study is earlier on in the presentation. It was a really, really fun study to do because the kids had a lot to say about their reading experiences in multiple languages. So I am coming to an end. You might be pleased to know. But in terms of, I've got 2 slides on short-term goals and medium-term goals for schools. And the short-term goals are really phrased in such a way that they could be included from tomorrow. So I've already mentioned including books in home languages in read-at-home diaries. So saying to children, I want to know what you read at home in your home languages. That is welcome in the classroom. I want you to talk about this. And asking children to share their language knowledge as part of formal education. Checking, what's that word in your language? Can you tell me? So embedding it in the teaching, the storytelling. Actively tell children that it's okay to use all their languages to work things out. If they have a little box or a scribble, a notepad where they work things out in multiple languages, even if they have to produce it for assessment purposes in the classroom language at the end, how they get there can use all their languages. And integrate multilingualism into praise. Simply, we tell pupils well done for lots and lots of reasons. So we might as well tell them well done for something that they know in their home language. Again, as part of normalizing, not celebrating, but giving it the same treatment as their other skills. And more medium, slightly longer term, I've not at all talked about the Multilingual Children's Library, which I started in Sheffield and which did a lot in terms of raising awareness in the region and on raising the status of multilingualism. And there is a link there to some of the materials from there. A display board about non-English books. What are the children reading, and can we give that a prominent, a place for display? I'm in two minds about award systems. In England, many schools have awards. So at the end of the year, there will be an assembly and children will get awards for maths and sports and music, etc. I don't always feel positively about this because there are lots of different reasons why that's not necessarily a good idea. But if awards already exist, make multilingualism a part of this. Reward children for being multilingual. Communicate the commitment to multilingualism to parents. So make sure that they are on board with this and don't tell their children, no, your school is for English or for Slovene or whatever. And enable staff training, parent information sessions to spread the understanding as to why this is important. It's not just a fad, it's not just a quick idea, the idea of it being social justice. So I've got a very brief slide just from feedback from a school which did a whole day of, they are planning on doing things integrated into the curriculum, but to kickstart their commitment to multilingualism in the classroom, they did 1 day of activities where each class across the whole school did several activities from the Lost Worlds website, and these were some of the feedback. Here, I liked drawing mini beasts and writing the names in lots of other languages. I feel proud that I learned to write butterfly in Japanese. So these are children who are commenting both on their own language being normalized and being open to other languages as part of the experience. And I think that is really important. This school did, again, on the right-hand side, I've got the Bullock report quote again, no child should be expected to cast off the language and culture of the home. And on the left-hand side, a quote from a school that did the Rivers of Reading activity, who said they were able to bring together languages spoken at home and in school. So exactly what the Bullock report was trying to make happened as part of the activities that this school engaged in. And the Bullock report goes on. I mean, it's a long document, but it also says these children are genuine bilinguals, but this fact is often ignored or unrecognized by schools. Their bilingualism is of great importance to the children and the families, and also to society as a whole. And essentially, it's something to be nurtured, and school is one of the places where it should be nurtured. And if we don't, then children will continue to edit their identity and assuming that there is a part of them that, as the one girl was telling me who'd read all the Harry Potter books, there is a part of them that nobody wants to know about. And I'm hoping that we can avoid that. And with that, I close.
Thank you very much, Sabine, for this very informative, very interesting, very useful, presentation. I'm sure for all our teachers that are listening now to your, or have been listening to this presentation, because you have added lots of ideas, so how to bring multilingualism in actual classrooms. So thank you very much. Any questions from the audience now? Now it's a time for discussion. Yes, anybody? Yeah,
Janja,
yes,
I might
go
have
ahead.
a comment. Yes, thank you very much for this inspiring lecture, because the idea of putting in front of the multilingualism, to put in front social justice, I think it's crucial. And I would just like to comment on one of your thoughts that you said, that when we talk about social justice, it does not really mean to celebrate the diversity, it means to acknowledge it. So I don't like when we talk about languages and we talk about singing and cooking and dancing in those languages. So this is something that I always object to, because it comes to this notion or this umbrella term of celebrating, which is all right. But if we do not acknowledge languages and cultures and diversity, then we are just one time at the Day of Languages, and then we are open to the idea of multilingualism. So yeah, the term to acknowledge, I think it's crucial. So thank you very much for your lecture.
Thank you, Janja. I think you're absolutely right. And I can't remember now, somebody wiser than me wrote about how this idea of, if we celebrate other languages and other cultures, through the very act of celebration, we other it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And I honestly, if I can find the quote again, but that was the moment for me when I read it a few years ago, and I thought, right, we need to stop talking about celebrating multilingualism and we need to start talking about normalizing it.
Thank you very much. This reminded me of my friend, I don't know whether he's still alive, but Hugo Birdsmoor from Brussels, who actually started talking about what is the norm, you see. Is it monolingualism, or is the, and this is exactly, you come back to normalizing, yeah, something that is normal, because the norm brings us very close to what is normal, right? Yeah. So yeah, and then this, yeah, multilingualism can be, or should be really.
Yeah, and I think again something that I found very helpful. I had this slide which says that 1 in 5 pupils are multilingual, and actually we don't often, in England certainly, we don't always look at that group as one. We say pupils who speak Arabic or pupils who speak Polish, and if you look at those individually, they are very small groups. But if you look at multilingual pupils as one group, they suddenly become the single largest minority of any minority. There are more multilingual pupils than disabled pupils, or so all of a sudden it becomes, as a whole group, it becomes bigger, and then it sounds more important.
I also have this question, and I've had this question from one partner, in the project, that, let's say, we don't have any, immigrant or migrant students in our school. We are a rural school, and this brings me to the question, do we all need multilingualism?
I think we do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's not just for, those who actually speak other languages at home or speak more languages, but it should be open, or everybody should have access to multilingualism.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember I originally trained as a German teacher in England, and about over 20 years ago, I remember I was in a classroom and I was not arguing, but I was communicating with a pupil who was 16 years old and was trying to convince me that he would never need German, ever, in his life. And I was a newly qualified teacher. I was brand new, and I remember saying, "Oh, you know, you might want to work there." And he said, "Oh, my dad was a farmer, my granddad was a farmer, I'll be a farmer." And I got really flustered. I was like, "Well, maybe you want to export your goods." I was trying to make up these reasons, but I think the world has changed so much in the last 20 years. I don't think it's any longer possible to live your life without encountering other languages, other cultures, and whether the best place you arrive at is openness and awareness, or you decide to move somewhere and live your life in a different country and etc. It doesn't really matter. But that openness and awareness, at the very least, I honestly think any child in school today, any adult alive today, needs in order to function meaningfully in society.
And maybe we can also bring to this, you know, what you talk about, normalizing another aspect, which is linguistic diet. You most probably know the work of Mehmet Bedgovic and Brock, I think, you know, who talk about also the health issues, so that I mean, you become healthier if you know more languages. So that's maybe, you know, another aspect that we don't talk about so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a slide that I is I looked at I developed a framework which looks at the reasons multilingual families want to maintain the heritage language, and it looks at the pragmatic and the emotional issues, and then within that how important these reasons are. So you end up with like 4 points, so very like crucial for pragmatic reasons, slightly important for pragmatic reasons, slightly important for emotional reasons, and really important for emotional reasons. And at the time I did that study, the emotional side, the important emotional side, was really underdeveloped in research, because if a family has important pragmatic reasons for maintaining the language, nobody argues with that. If you have an older relative living at home who doesn't speak the societal language, of course the children will have to try and learn the language. But I found in a lot of my work that actually they were very important emotional reasons for maintaining the language. And because society doesn't always view, again, we're getting better, you know, we're looking at mental health, but I've also done a lot of work. It's very interesting when I work in families, because the parents say, yes, we have important emotional reasons, therefore our child must learn the language. And the child goes, I have very important emotional reasons not to learn the language. So the parents initially see that as a reason to push the language onto the child. And then I see my work in working with the whole family and making sure that everybody listens to everybody else, because I am also, I should say, a firm believer in children choosing to reject aspects of their heritage, language, culture, identity, etc. So often when parents hear about my work, they think that I'm going to wave a magic wand and their child will suddenly be super motivated. Whereas sometimes it's very difficult family work for parents and children to listen to each other, to understand their different reasons. But I suppose that's a whole different lecture.
Yeah, that's a whole yeah. We've got something in chat. May I read that? From Alma from Sarajevo. She has joined us from Sarajevo. She says, a fantastic talk. Thank you so much. As somebody who used to be a refugee and experienced various of these language concerns as a multilingual child, I'm so grateful that we are shifting the conversation to challenging perspectives on what multilingualism really implies. I particularly appreciate your focus on identity and editing identities that seem to be crucial to understanding our students in foreign language class, especially. This is something that is not systematically researched in my country. Yeah, that's Bosnia and Herzegovina, so Sarajevo. Thank you, Alma. Would you like to add anything, maybe?
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't like to take up too much time. Thank you so much once again. What a fantastic talk, and really such an important topic. I usually talk to my students. I work at the University of Sarajevo, and I work with pre-service English language teachers, and we constantly talk about these issues, particularly now with the migrant crisis, because we have a lot of migrant students who are joining our mainstream schools and mainstream classes, and my students and pre-service teachers really do not know what to do with all of these other languages that they're encountering. So I really appreciate that you focus on identity and editing identities. I especially love that you use this editing identities. It's a great phrase that I'm going to use with my students as well in the future. And we constantly talk about this because it's really noticeable with, especially with refugees and migrant students, but also any other child that's really learning another language and joining this whole process while being multilingual or bilingual, or even not, honestly, but just learning a new language really implies a lot on identity and the student's identity in particular. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alma. Yeah, I mean, if anybody wishes to stay in touch beyond this talk, anybody is very, very welcome to contact me. I had my email address on the slide, but I'll just put it.
Oh, I'd love to stay in touch.
Yeah, please do. So I'm just going to put it in the chat again for anybody to know. What I was going to say, Alma, I think what you're saying is really important, because especially children from refugee backgrounds who might have been on a very long journey might have had to edit their identities multiple times to fit into different contexts. And I think children become very adept at doing this, because by and large, I mean, unless they act out, etc., but by and large, children try to be non-confrontational. They try and sort of fit in, make themselves fit. And of course, I think most people here will be familiar with this idea of third culture kids, that by the time these children are adults, they might have edited themselves into so many different contexts that this idea of who am I in the first place can become a really difficult question.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and this might be also the fact that you need to be, pigeonized, or whatever, like fit in a pigeonhole. And if you say, okay, well, I have an identity that is somehow, a combination of, I don't know, being English and being German and being, I don't know, something else, that's already a problem. So, maybe we should really talk about identity. So also make it plural, like what you mentioned, literacies. So what I let's say, have been thinking about is that, I mean, in English, we have started to use Englishes, right? And as many different variants, while in our language, let's say Slovene, we still don't use that. Nevertheless, we should, but then it trickles to you that, well, we are also in that situation, why don't we do it? And yeah, so things like that. Okay, any more, please, questions?
If I may just add, we don't have to talk just about children in this case. The same applies to adults. And I always talk to my students about, I always give this example when 10 years ago or so, I used to teach in a language course, and I had this CEO who was 75, so a senior citizen. So he was 75 and very confident in Bosnian, when speaking in Bosnian, in his mother tongue, very confident. So a CEO, just imagine a very confident, really eloquent person. But then when he joins English class, he usually would tell me, I feel like a kindergarten child. So that's exactly also related to partially to, how we really approach this. And I wish, at that time, I didn't really focus that much on making the most of this multilingual aspect. But I think that would help in adult education so much as well.
Definitely. I can see Jelka has her hand up, but I'm
Yes,
I'll just very briefly add, the work of Bonnie Norton in Canada is really interesting. She does a lot of work with adult age immigrants. And I think from her, I'm taking this idea of control, that actually, so when I moved to the UK, I was 18 years old. I came here to study. It was my choice. So I made a commitment to the language, to the culture, etc., because I had the choice. Whereas people from refugee backgrounds who do not have a choice in necessarily where they end up or why they left, and children who often don't have a choice if they are made to move with families. It's a very different story in terms of identity development, having an identity thrust upon you as well.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Ja.
Ich werde jetzt aber auf Deutsch sprechen, weil ich bin sehr froh. Auf Englisch tue ich mir ein bisschen schwer und jetzt
Kein Problem,
dass ich das auf Deutsch mache. Ich habe es sehr genossen und ich muss sagen, das war wirklich inspirierend auch für mich. Meine Kinder sind dreisprachig aufgewachsen. Das ist jetzt eine andere Geschichte und Dankeschön. Also das war wirklich komplett inspirierend für mich und ich denke, das Problem, das wir alle eigentlich haben, auch wir jetzt Fremdsprachenlehrer, ich unterrichte Deutsch, dass wir das Problem haben und dass wir immer perfekt sein müssen und keine Ahnung, dass wir keine Fehler zulassen dürfen. Aber ich denke, das ist das größte Problem. Also verstanden werden und eigentlich nicht nur die Sprache als solches vermitteln, sondern genauso wie Sie gesagt haben, die Kultur. Und wenn man durch die Sprache lernt man ja auch ein bisschen Kultur und ich denke, das kommt auch ein bisschen zu kurz, auch im Unterricht. Allgemein. Aber wie auch immer, jetzt könnten wir debattieren auf kurz und lang und noch länger, aber vielen Dank. Es hat mir sehr gut gefallen. Alles Gute und ja, viel Erfolg noch weiterhin nach England.
Danke.
Frohe Weihnachten.
Danke gleichfalls. I'm not sure, I would like to comment. I'm not quite sure which language to do it in.
You can do a bit of trans languaging,
okay.
you know, no problem.
That's past good. That's a great idea, because what I would like to talk about is my son who's growing up bilingual, and we've actually done a study together. So when my son was 4 years old, he decided to take a gap, 2 Jahre, 2 years from speaking German, because that's when school started, and after 2 years he decided to restart. And I just want to mention, Jelka was talking about mistakes in the classroom and editing out mistakes, and we had a lot of conversations when he restarted. Als mit seinem Deutsch wieder angefangen hat viele Fehler gemacht, lots of mistakes which often combined the two languages, and my favorite is ich starviere. So to starve from English with a perfect German verb ending, ich starviere. So we've got ich erfriere, for example, I'm freezing. So he came up with ich starviere. And rather than correct that, we adopted that as a family neologism, which actually did an amazing thing in terms of language awareness. You know, it showed so much about how he was combining his languages and the grammatic. So it was fantastic. And as such, we've got lots and lots of family examples, wie man beide Sprachen benutzen kann und gemeinsam zu einer sprachlichen Identität vermischen.
Das meine ich auch. Das ist der Punkt und das gefällt mir auch eigentlich an der ganzen Geschichte. Aber nicht nur jetzt, dass man Sprachen verbinden kann, und ich denke, das ist das Allerwichtigste. Man verbindet, weil ich denke sowieso, Grenzen sind passé irgendwie, obwohl wir total begrenzt sind jetzt. So.
Gerade in England.
Ja, lassen wir das jetzt politische mal weg, aber national gesehen sind das sowieso überflüssige Sachen. Und Sprachen müssen ja eigentlich eines ins andere fließen und wir müssen uns eigentlich miteinander verständigen können und verstehen wollen. Aber ich denke, das größte Problem ist mit dem Wollen. Aber das ist jetzt schon wieder politisch. Ich will jetzt nicht in das Politische gehen.
Aber ich glaube auch, es mit dem Können, wenn man nicht mehrsprachig aufwächst und nicht lernt, seine Sprachen, ich sage mal, mit einem offenen Ohr zu benutzen. Ganz am Anfang, bevor alle gekommen sind, hat Carmen was auf Slowenisch gesagt und ich habe gesagt, naja, ich kann ein ganz bisschen Russisch. Und ich habe mir eingebildet, da war ein bisschen Italienisch so ein bisschen bei. Kann sein, dass das komplett falsch war. Aber also ich habe ein paar Wörter verstanden. Dazu muss man aber sich dessen bewusst sein, sag ich mal, wie verschiedene Sprachen so ein bisschen zusammenhängen und offen. offen dem gegenüber zu sein. Und ich glaube, das ist gerade in England sehr schwierig, weil halt sehr wenig Lehrer gerade mehrsprachig sind. Das heißt, es fehlt tatsächlich die Arbeitskraft. Und deshalb arbeite ich auch viel mit Universitäten zusammen, um da halt bei der Lehrerausbildung und Teacher Training beizusteuern, dass das etwas mehr entwickelt wird.
Ich denke, das Problem ist jetzt auch mit England oder mit den USA, was auch immer, mit Sprachen, die eigentlich irgendwie Weltsprachen sind.
Ja.
Wir kommen jetzt aus Slowenien, wir sind 2 Millionen Menschen. Wir müssen, was Fremdsprachen anbelangt, irgendwie was können oder sprechen, weil sonst gehen wir sowieso unter. Aber dieses Bewusstsein müsste irgendwie auch nach England oder in die USA exportiert werden. Ja? Es gibt auch andere Menschen, die andere Sprachen sprechen, und eigentlich ist nicht nur, dass wir jetzt Slowenisch sprechen, wir sprechen auch verschiedene slowenische Sprachen untereinander, wenn ich jetzt mal das so salopp sage für Dialekte, aber wie auch immer. Das Wollen ist eigentlich das Problem an der ganzen Geschichte, und das Können, okay, das Können. Und ich denke, so schnell wie möglich müsste man mit Sprachen anfangen, aber das ist schon wieder eine andere Geschichte.
Also in England fängt man jetzt mit Sprachen an ab der 1. Klasse. Aber das ist eine andere Geschichte.
Zu spät. Ich denke, das ist zu spät.
Naja, also als ich zur Schule gegangen bin, habe ich in der 5. Klasse angefangen.
Ich habe mal eine Geschichte gehört, zum Beispiel eine Kollegin von mir, die ist halb Jordanierin und die kann Arabisch. Und es gibt in bestimmten Sprachen bestimmte Laute, die man halt lernen kann, wenn man sehr jung ist und später sehr schwer erlernen kann. Und das Arabische hat irgendwie keine Ahnung, was für Laute. Und wenn man älter ist, sage ich mal, nicht der als alt, kann man das nicht mehr erlernen. Und vor allem, was ich jetzt bei meinen Kindern gesehen habe, kleine Kinder lernen keine Sprache, sie saugen sie auf. So wie ein trockener Schwamm, wenn man einen Schwamm ins Wasser wirft. Man lernt sie nicht, man saugt sie auf.
Yeah, I think that raises completely different questions around sort of language acquisition, especially in early childhood.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Vielen Dank, Jelka. Das war sehr inspirierend. Also mein Deutsch ist ein bisschen gerüstet. Ja, Natasha, izvoli, tvoje vprašanje.
Sabine, I would like to thank you for your really very inspiring lecture. I'm really thank you very much. But I would like to comment and maybe stay with your remark that it's a difference between your son speaking English and German and a colleague of him or your neighbor or speaking English and Czech. And I think this is one of the problems in our society. The languages are valued very differently. And the problem in our society that also teachers are valuing different languages differently. So it's still, we had a very new evaluation study on migrant pupils in our schools. And there are quotes from teachers, and they say, the problem is that these children are not speaking Slovene at home. Yeah, and probably it would never happen if these children would speak English at home, if their home language is English. But the problem is because it's Albanian, it's Arabic, it's Chinese.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really, it's not the problem of identity. Probably it is a part of the problem of identity, what we spoke before. But here it's not the problem of identity, but it's really of evaluating different languages and different cultures.
Hierarchy.
Yeah, absolutely. The hierarchy of languages. And I think that is why when I speak to teachers, I make a point of, I mean, I know Chinese or Mandarin is being valued now, but that's why I use that as an example, because it's very alien to most teachers. I find that the languages that are valued in England by teachers tend to be the ones they feel they have some sort of connection to. And that is mainly traditionally German, English, French. German, French, Spanish, because they are the ones that traditionally were taught as foreign languages here. France and Spain as tourism countries, Germany as a big industry. Those are the conceptions. I'm not necessarily saying they are the truth. I'm just saying this is how it's being interpreted. And I think what I experienced with my son was exactly as I said. When he says to somebody, "Oh, I'm half German," they go, "Oh, guten Tag," or "Zwei Bier bitte." Whereas if his friend said, "I'm Czech," there's nothing there. There's no connection that the teacher can immediately make. So the only response they can think of is, "That's nice." And it misses that validation, that connection. So I'm hoping, again, by changing the narrative, and rather than proving to the child what you know or what connection you have to that language, instead turning it around and giving the child opportunity to showcase their language, changes this narrative of saying, "Oh, I'm interested in what your language brings to the table in terms of supporting your learning." And that can happen with all languages. So it's a hard, difficult change to make, because it's natural to want to show this connection. It's natural to sort of want to say, "Oh, look, I know 3 words in German, let me drag them out." And I had that when I moved to England. I remember distinctly, bearing in mind I was 18 years old, one of my fellow students immediately proceeded to say, "Oh, ich heiße Andrew, ich bin 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I looked at him and said, "Well, you're not 12 anymore, are you?" And he said, "Well, I can't count any further. That's how old I was when I learned it." But that was, that was his connection. That was how he wanted to show that he was engaging with my German identity, which is nice. But turning it on its head and saying, "Oh, how would I say hello? How would I say thank you?" And instead making an open invitation for children to become the experts, hopefully will help to change that narrative of hierarchies very, very slowly.
If I may just add something, Natasha, I think you will agree with me that this idea of hierarchy of languages in Slovenia will change when we will have an opportunity to formally learn languages that are not valued right now as being very high on this ladder, right? When I think it's important to acknowledge languages that children are bringing from home, but at some point they have to have a right to develop their language skills, and this is something that Slovenian school system has to provide for. They have to have a formal opportunity to develop this skill even further, because if not, then they will stay on the level of counting only to 12 instead of counting to 10.
Yeah, but as we saw, even in England, they are learning only in community schools, and there's no money for for public to start to develop these programs in public schools. They're all
so in Sweden, interestingly, I don't know if in Sweden, every pupil has the official right to receive instruction in their home language in their normal school. And it's interesting when I talk to teachers in England, because when I said, "So what would you think about pupils getting instruction in their home language?" And impossible, can't be done. It's go, well, but it is a very, very difficult undertaking that speaks to a lot of dedication towards multilingualism and valuing pupils' identities. And I think you're absolutely right, Natasha. We are not there. We're a long, long way away from that.
Thank you very much.
Maybe, if I may add, I mean, this, you know, ICT, so in information communication technology, can maybe help us also to bring more languages in the classroom. And I mean, children who are, let's say, fluent, you know, in speaking in their language, I mean, if we offer them some facilities, you know, that they can use in their own language, or for example, if they can read, as you said, books in their own language, they will, you know, become literate, and they will at least maintain a certain level of that language. And the other thing is that what you mentioned also, you mentioned that this is not, I mean, showing languages that you know is not part of formal educational context. And that's problematic. So our, I mean, children in Slovenia who, let's say, come from Bosnia or other, you know, or Albania or Serbia or Germany, German, they can actually show the language in German because German is taught. But I mean, they cannot show their language, you know, that they are fluent in Arabic, and this is not formalized as a subject and is not part of, let's say, end of the year certificate. Yeah. And this is something that is missing, and I think we can, I mean, with these ICTs and assessment, computer assessment, I mean, we can do something on that, and that the children, you know, can be officially or formally, I mean, their knowledge can be formally recognized. And I think this is what is missing.
So there are some really, sorry. There are some really interesting developments. So at the moment, I'm consulting with the International Baccalaureate Organization, because they are introducing a new unit into their IB diploma on language and heritage and literacy, which is trying to do exactly this. So without all teachers being experts in all languages, it is formalizing opportunities for students. And of course, the IB diploma is sort of 17 years old. So to create and engage with their various languages, identities creatively, which could be about exploring their heritage. It could be about writing diary entries. So we're formalizing how exactly this will be assessed. But it's obviously happening in an international schools context, which is by default more welcoming towards these things. But again, I'm hoping once it exists almost like a proof of concept, that it might become more interesting to different national contexts. If we manage to show, because obviously the IB diploma is taken by I think 1.4 million children every year, and the course will be optional. So we'll see how many children will take it, but hopefully it will give us a really large body of students who can show the way of actually how they can contribute their multiple languages in a formal education context. So I'm very excited about that.
May I ask you, I mean, it's not personal, but I mean, your opinion, do you think there would be, I mean, would governments be interested in, I don't know, in an international project, you know, on this, you know, how to formalize, I mean, heritage languages, you know, in their educational system? Because if you know, I don't know, more countries get together and come up with, you know, some solutions or some ideas, you know, so how to do it, and then maybe even check it, I mean, check them out, so actually implement some of these ideas and see how it works.
I think that would be really exciting. I think it would have to be sold differently to different governments.
Yes, I agree. Yes, absolutely. I know what you mean. Yes.
Yeah, I think it would depend on who is collaborating on this project, from which national contexts, and then phrasing it in the way that it appeals to
but I think that more countries, you know, if they come together and if more specialists come together, so experts on this, that this would have just I would say a bigger value, you know, or more power, you know, to talk to the governments.
I mean, right now, for example, in England, they are afraid because they are losing the European workforce. They are moving back.
I know. I've been listening to BBC. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And there have been multiple articles on the state of language education, and there are now some noises happening in terms of, oh, actually, we have got pupils who are multilingual. Huh. So, I mean, whether they will put something towards that in terms of funds, etc., remains a different question. But I think the UK right now, or England, is very, very ripe for a solution, essentially, whatever that may look like.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to comment or, you know, Liliana, yeah, she has offered, a YouTube link. Liliana, would you like to talk about this link that you have just copied in the chat, or shall I just open it and see what it is about? Okay. Oh yes. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Liliana. Yeah, exactly. This is what it is. Yeah, in many languages.
Sorry, but my battery has been running low. I will probably be disconnected soon.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah. If nothing else, then at least, you know, say I don't know, hello, or in different languages and so on. This is absolutely not enough, but if you don't do even that, then yeah. So as we said, celebration is maybe just how to say, halfway to normalizing, or maybe it's an important step that we need to make and then go further. Yeah. Okay, well, then if there are no more questions, then we will wrap it up and again say really thank you, sincere thank you to Sabine, so who herself is a multilingual speaker, and thank you for sharing all the sources with us, and we will try to promote and disseminate all the information about your projects. So among our teachers, and I'm sure you will get some feedback, on how we have been using this. Yes, and to our students. So here at the Faculty of Education and Faculty of Arts and other faculties here across Slovenia. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much.
And wish you, well, a more kind of healthy, less closed, less kind of hedged 2022, and all the best.
Thank you, the same to you. How do you say Merry Christmas in Slovene?
Srećen Božić.
Srećen
Božić.
Srećen Božić.
Srećen. Sreća is happiness.
Okay.
And then you, you have to, how to say, so the adjective and the noun, has to be, how to say, related. Okay. Yeah. So you say Srećen Božić.
Srećen Božić.
That's it. Good. Well done. Yeah.
Thank you. All the best. Frohe Weihnachten.
Yeah. Frohe Weihnachten.
Bye.
Torej, želim lepo, takšno, ne preveč zaprto, in upajmo, da se potem spet vidimo januarja, ko nadaljujemo torej s tedenskimi pomenki. Vsi prisrčno vabljeni in lep večer.
Praznike, pozdravja.
Ja, hvala.
Srečno.
Nasvidenje.
Nasvidenje.
Pazite na se. Tako, srečno.